公交车上的人都被困住了，变成夺命巴士了。哎呦，要死啊！这水都能钓鱼了。我得走了，再不走走不掉了。69全关了，估计39也全关了，商家全部走了。
This was Shanghai about 10 days ago. I knew China was copying everything, but I didn't know that they needed to copy Venice too. After a massive rainstorm recently, China's #1 city became nothing. Pirates of the Caribbean's more like Pirates of Shanghai. We got Chinese Venice before GTA 6. Koi fish were swimming down the street. Shanghai Hall got flooded so badly people started calling it Shanghai Pond. A well-known mall became a swimming pool too. At first, it was only one district flooding, and then the residents who were living in the unflooded districts still sipped their coffee and mocked nearby flooded areas with condescending messages like, "Oh, I can just kayak over to meet you there." And the words barely made out online, another district was drowned in, then another, and then another one. Even China's most expensive skyline, the IFC Tower in Liujiazui, well, couldn't hold. The ceiling gave way and water poured straight down onto expensive stores like Hermes, Prada, and Gucci. Didn't Xi Jinping just speak at the World AI Conference? He had just declared that China's meteorology sector would team up with AI companies to point the way forward for world weather forecasting.
我宣布，未来5年。中国将面向发展中国家提供5000个人工智能专题研修培训名额，推动气象智能预警方案妈祖在30个国家落地应用。
And right on cue, it doesn't work.
这个水啊，这么个流法，马桶里面这样流出来。
吹涼嘛，水倒流我溝了啦，我睇下得啊，貪聽啊我啲。
Okay, this is not just in Shanghai, across northern China, as well as in southern areas of China, and in the west, actually, as we speak, all facing tremendous flooding. Of course, natural disasters, summer months, and, these are things that are part of the problems, right? Like, global climate change is changing a lot of things, as they say, and so we assume things are getting worse. But it doesn't mean that, every single year China has a historical flood bigger than the last. And of course, this is assuming that China didn't pour so much money into infrastructure that it constantly propagandizes, right? Well, obviously I'm joking because China literally spends so much money on infrastructure and infrastructure only. Shanghai, though, China's #1 metropolis, ends up like this. We can only blame the CCP for this one, because Shanghai's own 14th five-year plan says it in black and white that by 2025, drainage capacity in Shanghai's central urban districts was only expected to reach the once in 3 to 5 year storm standard, and even that target was only expected to be met in 35% of the area. But China has these once-in-a-lifetime storm every freaking summer, and so if you take that into account, this is nowhere up to par. Now compare that to other cities like Tokyo. Tokyo's 23 wards are built to withstand 50 millimeters of rainfall per hour, with key areas rated for 75 millimeters per hour. But China's own classification system, that would put Tokyo at around 5 to 10 year standard, and its key areas around 10 to 15 years, which is a full tier higher than Shanghai. Now, given the rainfall that Shanghai just experienced, Tokyo's system would have handled it without any issue. Another one, Singapore, also a full tier above. General areas will be rated about 5 to 10 years, critical infrastructure is 10 to 15. And so when Tokyo and Singapore say that they're talking key areas to protect critical infrastructures, what they mean are things like schools, hospitals, subway systems, power and communication hubs, not government buildings as it would be considered critical in China. You might have heard of this term called infrastructure maniac when it describes how China builds these big bridges, roads, and everything else so quickly, right? But since when did Singapore, Japan take the crown from China? Like, look, these people, they go around to different countries from China, the nationalists or the little pinks. They love to mock foreign infrastructure as hopelessly behind. The US is a giant countryside. Japan is stuck in the 1990s. Singapore is backwater. The flood slapped that narrative right in the face, though, because being old doesn't mean it's not functional. And being functional is better than not. That's simple logic, right? Those countries, they've got high standard drainage systems that have been running for 20 plus years already. Time tested, proven to be effective. And Shanghai's own 3 to 5 year standard is still an aspirational target. So if you don't want to see your city turn into floodplain again, you'd better wait another 20 years before these systems come online. Why do these countries take flood control infrastructure so seriously? Well, it's because in an elected system, every bit of money that you spend has to be accounted for to the taxpayers, to the voters, right? So officials, even if there is corruption, which by the way, in Singapore, that's a non-existent issue or very little, what they have to do is things that are very, I wouldn't say completely unglamorous, but at least in most parts, it will be described as sort of the invisible underground work that improves the lives of people. That's what you're supposed to do as an elected official. Things that matter, but when it doesn't appear on the surface, people might not know or appreciate it. But when things actually hit the fan, yeah, that's when you want those type of silent improvements, not face projects, right? People who've actually casted a ballot, they're not so easily fooled by these grandeur as much as people who would have just constantly seen it on state media or maybe obsessed with propaganda from China. My point is here is that if you are constantly surrounded in this environment where everything seems so beautiful, but then when something serious happens, it just all crumbles, you would start to lose trust, wouldn't it? And that's exactly what's happening. Now, if a flood in China kills a mass number of people, like the way it did in Zhengzhou in 2021, officials in other countries would probably be bowing in apology, resigning on the spot immediately, of course, and then probably even facing jail time because of the consequence. But the same officials that oversaw the Zhengzhou flood in 2021 didn't get punished. They didn't have to answer to the voters. They only had to answer to their superiors. So why bother? This is where I'm getting at, is where, why bother with high quality underground drainage systems? Why bother where you put money that, it goes to where you cannot see, It should be going to where leadership can see it. Like, if you want to get promoted, it's not about building the best, it's just building the most visible, most expensive. Now, to be fair, flooded cities, they're not just unique to China, Shanghai or Zhengzhou. New York recently got flooded. Some of its highways in Queens were flooded, and you constantly see videos circulated of the subway stations, being flooded, dirty water, But that's a problem, right? Renovating underground, the pipe networks where you're supposed to have the drainage running through, it's expensive anywhere in the world because you're overhauling an entire underground system. You would have to dig up the road, replace the pipes, you expand the pump stations, deal with residents' objections, cause a lot of traffic problems. But those are limited governments with limited power. China doesn't have that problem, right? It has an unlimited government with unlimited power. So building the Three Gorges Dam, instantly approved, decided and done. Laying 40,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, done easily. Skyscrapers, constantly putting up. Government complexes, landmark buildings. A lot of these are done very fast, approved on a whim. Because the point is, if some senior leader one day decided that the Great Wall of China needed to be tiled, officials will be scrambling to the foot of the Great Wall within hours with cement, maybe marbling or gold, whatever. My point is that in China it's all about achievements. That's how you get promoted. It's not really about functionality, and so the CCP is all about political achievements that can be seen immediately, visible. Being fast equals more achievements. Being slow just means that you're overworking yourself for nothing. You're not going to get promoted on substance. Who's going to take seriously, the project of building out a drainage system when you can build 3 more giant skyscrapers? That's where I see them weighing the good and the bad, which is still kind of twisted in its own. But I looked into it. For example, the same official who got Tesla's Shanghai plant built in record time, who ran this flashy import expo year after year, once tried to imitate Tokyo and build his own underground temple. And he started it, but then stopped almost immediately. Why? Because he got an order from above saying that he was promoted to the state council premier. So much for that. Political achievement is just an attention economy. That's why in China, in every city, you see more and more focus on the visuals, and so much more luxurious every single year. The invisible flood control and drainage systems crumble like tofu the moment it rains. The irony is that one of the earliest known historical achievements of Chinese history was Yu the Great, Emperor Yu, managing a flood. Now look at this country, they can't manage anything. China's nickname, the infrastructure maniac, is not just about building, but it's about building so fast, so crazy, and just so insanely, to the point where you're like, whoa, this guy's crazy. That's the infrastructure maniac. Now, in respect to this, I think China actually had a teacher on it, the Soviet Union. Because you got to learn it from somebody, right? Because this wasn't China before. Things were more about virtues and credibility too. So they wouldn't do this. But in 1935, Stalin decided to build the Moscow metro, and he wanted to show the world that a socialist subway system would vastly outshine New York's. And so there's marble walls, crystal chandeliers, bronze sculptures, murals, even paintings by famous Russian artists. They all went into these subway stations. And he ordered his designers to convey a bright, hopeful future, to make people believe that they were now masters of their own destiny, that this embodied the superiority of socialism. Sounds familiar, right? That's exactly the same type of messaging that they're trying to get. The logic behind China turning subway stations into propaganda showcases. Well, back then, Stalin didn't have social media, so otherwise you'd probably see a bunch of American tourists going to China and making videos about them. Well, my point is, in 1938, Mayakovskaya Station won a gold award at the New York World's Fair, and Stalin and the Soviet people were thrilled. The metro suffered disaster after disaster, and because of press censorship, word only spread by rumor. It wasn't until February of 1982, when censorship had loosened somewhat, that the news finally broke. An escalator brake had failed in the Moscow metro, killing 8 people on the spot and seriously injuring 30. United Press International corrected the record, putting the actual death toll at 30, and countless more were injured. The darkest, most Zhengzhou-like detail was that the escalator equipment had been replaced just months before with brand new parts, 3 months earlier actually, and had passed a safety inspection just 2 days before the accident. And newspapers had loudly praised how advanced it was, and then it killed people anyways. Soviet citizens used to mock the New York subway as inferior to Moscow's. Chinese citizens today love to mock foreign cities' inferior infrastructure as being so far behind China's. But China's own flood bulletin from 2006 to 2018, over 150 Chinese cities flooded every single year, 258 at the 2010 peak, 246 in 2019. And over the past 20 years, more than 20,000 people have officially died from flooding. That's the official number, so think about what the real number could be. Compare that to Paris, which has a drainage system built in 1850, 2,400 kilometers of tunnels tall enough to walk through, over 6,000 storage basins, cleared twice a year by a permanent crew. In 170 years, 0 death from network failure. Vienna, in Austria, 1830, the sewer system was built with 4 times the reserve capacity of the worst rainfall in a century, also 0 death. A 19th century Austrian drainage system outperforms what China builds today. 2 reservoirs make the point. Sichuan, Shanxi. In 1983, officials waited 3 hours to evacuate after ordering a discharge, busy loading their own furniture, even chicken coops, onto trucks, and 870 people drowned. Some in a single alley near a government building. Gotou, Shanghai. This is 1993. A reservoir completed 3 years earlier, rated excellent quality, collapsed overnight with no warning system. 325 dead. Natural disaster or design by choice? Shanxi, 2008. Illegal operated tailings dam collapse triggered a mudslide, killing 277 people. Another case of collusion between officials and business. Beijing, July 21st. Zhuozhou, Hebei province, summer of 2023. To protect Beijing and Xiong'an new area from flooding, Zhuozhou was a city that was deliberately sacrificed and turned into a lake. 130,000 people were affected. The exact death toll was never disclosed. According to experts, they were pointing out that under China's overall flood control planning, Zhuozhou had always been designated as a flood diversion zone for Beijing and Xiong'an. Banqiao Dam, one of the most famous cases in Henan province. This was 1975, August 8th, China's worst disaster. One of the government still won't openly discuss as of today. At around 12:40 a.m., a wall of water equivalent to 40 times the volumes of Hangzhou's West Lake surged downstream when the Banqiao Dam collapsed, and the entire region became an ocean. People were crushed by collapsing houses, strangled by wire and cables, left hanging in trees, or slammed into raised rail embankments and swept into ditches alongside them. Ditches that later became mass graves for thousands. After the water receded, countless decomposing bodies drew swarms of flies. One PLA soldier recalled that the flies formed such dense black clumps on the trees and power lines that the branches and cables bent under their weight. Banqiao was a product of the Great Leap Forward in an era obsessed with impossible grain yield targets. The guiding philosophy was that the more water you store, the better for irrigation, and the more revolutionary it looked. This mentality meant officials were reluctant to open floodgates even in normal circumstances, that mindset that persisted all the way to the recent Liulan Reservoir collapse. When Banqiao faced record-breaking rainfall, regulations called for fully opening the gates, but without authorization from above, the reservoir only released a token amount. No one dared to act without approval. But by the time approval to fully open the gates finally came through, it was too late. Of the dam's 17 discharge gates, only 5 could actually open. The rest were rusted shut. Again, exactly like a recent dam collapse. As the water level approached just 1 meter from the top of the dam, someone needed to authorize deliberately breaching it to prevent total collapse, but no one dared to make that call. They tried to reach the CCP leader at the time, but water that should have been released earlier wasn't. So by the time they wanted it to release, the gates had rusted shut. So layers upon layers of human failure ultimately produced what is considered the worst dam collapse disaster in human history. The Discovery Channel ranked the Banqiao Dam collapse as the #1 man-made technological disaster in history, ahead of even the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which ranked third. Banqiao killed over 20 times more people than Chernobyl. And China's official death toll for Banqiao is around 26,000, but people within China's United Front Work Committee jointly disclosed that the real death toll was around as high as 230,000. So the moral of the story is never trust what's on the surface, but you need to actually trust that it is functional, and in most cases, until a disaster struck, you can never tell if it's functional in China. Thank you very much for watching this episode. Hope you enjoy the content, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.